He thought tonight was about love, but someone had already decided it would be his last free breath. The crystal glass barely made a sound as Ava Brooks set it down, her fingers steady despite the storm rising beneath her skin, the soft golden glow of the restaurant lights reflecting off polished marble and silverware that cost more than a month of her rent, the kind of place where people like her were meant to disappear into the background, not change the course of a man's fate, and yet in that precise moment, she did something no one in that room would ever forget, because as Damian Romano's attention lingered on his fiancée's laughter across the table, Ava's hand moved with quiet precision, slipping a folded note into his palm as naturally as placing a napkin, her eyes never meeting his, her posture unchanged, her breath controlled, as if she hadn't just crossed an invisible line that most people would never dare approach, and for a split second, nothing happened, just the low hum of conversation, the clink of cutlery, the soft echo of a jazz piano drifting from the corner, but then Damian felt it, the weight of the paper against his skin, small, almost insignificant, yet heavy with something he couldn't name, and slowly, without drawing attention, he unfolded it beneath the table, his movements calm, practiced, the kind of control built from years of surviving situations where hesitation meant loss, and when his eyes scanned the message, just 6 words written in tight, urgent handwriting. Your fiancé set a trap. Leave now. Something shifted behind his gaze, not panic, not fear, but recognition, the quiet ignition of instinct that had kept him alive longer than most men in his world, and across from him, Vanessa Hale smiled as she lifted her champagne glass, flawless, composed, every inch the woman people envied and trusted, her voice smooth as she spoke about wedding venues and guest lists, unaware that the balance of the night had just tilted, that a single waitress she hadn't even noticed had introduced doubt into a man who trusted no one lightly, and Ava was already walking away, her steps measured, her face blank, disappearing into the rhythm of service as if she had never existed in that moment at all, but from her position near the edge of the dining room, she watched, not directly, never directly, only through reflections in glass, through the angle of mirrors and polished surfaces, her mind tracking details the way she had been taught, the way she could never unlearn. The slight tension in Vanessa's shoulders, the almost imperceptible glance toward the entrance, the subtle way a man at the bar adjusted his stance like he was waiting for something, and Ava knew, with a certainty that tightened her chest, that the clock had already started ticking, that whatever was coming would not wait for permission, and as Damian Romano slowly lifted his glass, his expression unchanged to anyone watching, his thumb pressing lightly against the folded paper now hidden beneath the table, the air around him seemed to grow heavier, quieter, as if the room itself was holding its breath, and in that suspended moment between ignorance and awareness, between celebration and consequence, everything that was about to unfold had already begun. The most dangerous move is never the loud one, it is the one no one notices until it is too late. Ava kept her head down as she moved between tables, the black tray balanced lightly on her fingertips, her expression calm, almost distant, the perfect mask of someone who belonged to the background, but her mind was anything but still, it was mapping the room in quiet, calculated fragments, each detail locking into place with a precision that felt less like thinking and more like remembering something she had already seen before, because across the polished reflection of a wine cabinet, she caught Vanessa Hale lifting her champagne glass not to drink, but to tilt it slightly toward the bar, just enough for someone watching to notice, just enough for a signal to be sent without a word, and at the far end of the room, a man in a tailored suit shifted his weight, his hand brushing the side of his jacket in a motion so small it would have gone unnoticed by anyone who was not looking for it, but Ava saw it. She always saw the things people thought they could hide, and then there was the door, the east exit that was supposed to remain clear for staff, now partially blocked by a decorative stand that had not been there 20 minutes ago. A subtle obstruction, easy to dismiss, unless you understood how exits became obstacles when someone needed control over where people could and could not go, and Ava felt the quiet tightening in her chest, not fear, not yet, but recognition, the kind that came from a lesson she had learned years ago in a cramped apartment where her brother would sit across from her with a deck of cards and a stopwatch, telling her to watch his hands, to listen to the rhythm of the room, to notice what changed when no one thought it mattered. Patterns tell the truth, he used to say, his voice steady, patient, and the truth is always there before anything happens, and now those words echoed in her mind as she watched the pattern unfold in front of her, because Vanessa was not celebrating. She was preparing, and the people around her were not. Guests, they were pieces, placed carefully, waiting for the moment everything would align. Ava adjusted the tray in her hands and moved closer to the edge of the VIP section, careful not to draw attention, her steps measured to match the tempo of the room, slow, deliberate, invisible, but her eyes kept tracking Damian Romano without ever looking directly at him, watching the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders angled slightly away from the glass behind him, the way his hand rested closer to the edge of the table as if ready to move without hesitation. He had read the note, he had understood enough to change something, but not enough to see all of it, not yet, and Ava knew that was the most dangerous place to be, half-aware, because half-awareness could lead to the wrong decision, and the wrong decision would close whatever narrow window still remained. She inhaled slowly, steadying the rising pressure in her chest, because there was one more detail that did not fit, one more piece that made the pattern complete. The way Vanessa glanced toward the hallway leading to the restrooms, not once, but twice, too quickly to be casual, too controlled to be nervous, and that was when Ava realized the misdirection. The trap was not where it appeared to be, it was not in the obvious exit or the crowded floor, it was somewhere quieter, somewhere Damian would be guided without resistance, and for the first time since she slipped the note, Ava felt the urgency sharpen into something undeniable, because whatever was coming was closer than he thought, and if he moved in the wrong direction, even by a few steps, there would be no second chance to correct it. You do not learn to see danger in a single night, you survive it long enough that your eyes refuse to ignore it. Ava did not need to look directly at the table to know the moment Damian Romano shifted again. She could feel it in the rhythm of the room, in the way conversations near him subtly slowed as people sensed a change they could not explain, and that feeling pulled her backward through time, not in a rush, but in fragments, sharp and precise, like pieces of glass catching light. Back to a small kitchen that always smelled like burnt coffee and cheap detergent, back to a man who never raised his voice yet somehow filled every space with quiet authority, her brother Marcus, who had taught her that survival was not about strength, it was about attention. He would sit across from her with a deck of cards and spread them across the table, asking her to close her eyes and then open them for just 2 seconds. Tell me what changed, he would say, and at first she always got it wrong. She would guess the obvious things, the card that moved, the one that flipped, and he would shake his head. Slowly, not disappointed, just patient. That is what they want you to see, he would explain, tapping the table lightly. Real danger hides in what feels normal, and over time she learned to notice the hesitation before a hand moved, the glance that came half a second too early, the silence that stretched just a little too long. And the night he never came home was the night everything he taught her stopped being a lesson and became a necessity. The police report had been clean. Too clean, a situation that did not quite add up, a story that felt rehearsed, and Ava had stood in that same kitchen holding a cup she could not bring herself to drink from, realizing that whatever had taken him was not loud, not obvious, but careful, calculated, hidden in plain sight, and from that day forward, she stopped trusting appearances, she stopped believing in coincidence, and now, standing in a restaurant filled with polished surfaces and carefully curated smiles, she felt that same quiet certainty settle into her bones. Because this was not random, this was not instinct, this was a pattern she had seen before: Vanessa's timing, the man at the bar, the blocked exit, the subtle pull toward the hallway. It all formed a structure, a sequence designed to guide one person into one place at one moment. And Ava understood something else, something that made her breath tighten just slightly. Damian Romano was not just in danger, he was being studied, watched, anticipated. Every reaction of his already accounted for by someone who believed they knew exactly how he would respond, and that was what made it worse, because if he followed instinct alone, he would walk straight into the path they had prepared for him. Ava adjusted her grip on the tray, her fingers steady even as her thoughts accelerated. She could not undo what had been set in motion, she could not stop the entire design, but she could disrupt it, just enough to give him a chance to step outside of what they expected, and that meant she had to act again. Not loudly, not in a way that would draw attention, but in the same quiet, deliberate way Marcus had taught her, changing one small detail in a system built on certainty, because sometimes, the difference between walking into a trap and walking away from it was not power, it was one person choosing to see what everyone else ignored, and in that moment, Ava Brooks understood that she had already crossed the line between observer and participant, and there was no stepping back now. Trust is not given in his world, it is tested in silence. Damian Romano did not react the way most men would. He did not look around sharply or question the nearest person. Instead he leaned back slightly in his chair as if settling deeper into the evening, his fingers resting loosely against the stem of his glass, his expression unchanged to anyone watching, but beneath that stillness, every detail around him sharpened into focus. He replayed the note in his mind, each word stripped of emotion, reduced to intent. Your fiancé set a trap. Leave now, and he asked himself the only question that mattered, not whether it was true, but whether ignoring it carried a greater risk than believing it. And across from him, Vanessa continued speaking with effortless grace, her voice smooth, her smile practiced, but now that doubt had been introduced, Damian began to notice the fractures, the way her laughter arrived half a second late, the way her hand lingered just a little too long on the table before reaching for her glass, subtle, almost imperceptible shifts that most people would dismiss, but he did not, because in his world, consistency was everything, and inconsistency was a signal. He adjusted his position slightly, turning his chair just enough to change the angle of his reflection in the glass behind him, using it to scan the room without moving his head, and what he saw confirmed what he could not yet prove. The man at the bar who had not ordered a drink in over 10 minutes, the blocked exit that should have been clear, the quiet coordination that only revealed itself when you stopped looking directly at it. And yet, even with all of that, Damian did not stand, he did not leave, because walking away too quickly would mean surrendering control to a situation he did not fully understand, and control was not something he relinquished lightly. Instead he made a decision that few would expect. He chose to test the truth. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze settling on Vanessa with calm curiosity. Maybe we should move to a quieter table, he said, his tone casual, almost thoughtful, as if the idea had just occurred to him, somewhere closer to the back. And for a moment, everything paused, not the room, not the music, but her, just a fraction of a second, a flicker in her eyes that disappeared as quickly as it came. But it was enough, more than enough, because that hesitation did not belong to someone in control, it belonged to someone adjusting a plan. And in that instant, Damian knew the note had not been a guess, it had been a warning. And across the room, Ava saw it too, not the words, not the exchange, but the shift, the way Vanessa's posture realigned, the way her attention sharpened, the way the invisible threads connecting the room pulled tighter. And Ava understood something critical. The pattern had been disturbed, but not broken, not yet. Because now they would adapt, they would redirect, and if Damian followed the wrong path, even slightly, he would still end up exactly where they wanted him. And that was when Ava realized that the note alone was not enough. The truth had been delivered, but it was incomplete, and incomplete truth could be just as dangerous as ignorance. She moved again, her steps measured, her tray steady, closing the distance just enough to place herself within reach of the table without drawing attention. Because there was one more thing he needed to know, one more piece that would shift his decision from cautious awareness to precise action. And this time, she would not write it down, because there was no time left for that, only a single moment, a single breath, to alter the outcome before the night chose its direction for them. Sometimes the difference between walking into a trap and walking away is not strength, it is a single sentence spoken at the right time. Ava moved with the same quiet precision she had used all night, her tray balanced, her expression neutral, but every step measured against the invisible countdown tightening around the room, because now the pattern had shifted, not broken, and that made it more dangerous, not less. As she approached the table again under the pretense of replacing silverware, the soft clink of utensils masking the urgency beneath her calm, and when she leaned in just enough to adjust the setting near Damian's hand, she did not look at him, she did not pause long enough to draw attention, she simply let her voice fall into the smallest space between sounds, barely above a whisper, not the hallway, the glass. And then she straightened immediately, her hands already moving away, her body turning as if the moment had never existed. But Damian heard it, every word, and this time there was no need to interpret, no room for doubt, because the instruction aligned perfectly with what he had already begun to see, the subtle pull toward the hallway, the expectation that he would choose the quieter path, the more controlled exit. And now he understood that the safer option was the one they wanted him to believe in, while the real danger lay in following it. his grip tightened slightly against the edge of the table. Not visibly, not enough for anyone watching to notice, but enough for him to anchor the decision forming in his mind, and across from him, Vanessa tilted her head with a soft smile, her eyes studying him with a warmth that felt just a little too deliberate. "Are you all right?" she asked, her tone light, concerned in all the ways it was supposed to be, but Damien did not answer immediately. Instead he let the silence stretch for just a fraction longer than expected, watching how she held it. How she filled it, how her fingers tapped once against the table before going still again, and in that small, telling moment, everything aligned, the note, the signals, the hesitation, the redirection, it all pointed to one truth: he was being guided, and now he knew exactly where they expected him to go, which meant he could choose otherwise. He leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed, his expression returning to that same composed calm he had worn since the beginning of the night. "Actually," he said, his voice even, controlled, "I think I need some air." A simple statement, ordinary, almost predictable, but his eyes did not move toward the hallway, they shifted toward the wide glass panels lining the side of the restaurant, the open view that most people ignored in favor of the more obvious exits, and that was where the difference lay, because predictability was the foundation of every plan, and deviation was the one thing no plan could fully contain. And from across the room, Ava saw it, the decision, the change in direction, the moment where instinct became action, and for the first time since the night began, she allowed herself a single, steady breath, not relief, not yet, but the quiet recognition that the path had shifted just enough to give him a chance, because whatever had been set in motion was still moving, still adapting, but now it would have to adjust to him, not the other way around, and in a room built on control, that was the one advantage no one had accounted for. A perfect plan does not fail all at once, it begins to crack the moment someone refuses to follow it. Damien Romano rose from his seat with the same controlled ease he brought to every movement, his chair sliding back just enough to signal intention without urgency, his expression calm, composed, as if stepping away for a moment of fresh air was nothing more than a casual decision, but inside, every calculation had already shifted, every instinct sharpened to a single focus, because now he was no longer reacting to the room, he was moving against it, and that difference changed everything. Vanessa's smile lingered a second too long as she watched him stand, her eyes tracking his direction not with concern, but with expectation, and when she realized he was not turning toward the hallway, not following the path she had subtly guided him toward, something almost invisible flickered across her face, a brief tightening, a recalibration, gone as quickly as it appeared, but Damien saw it, and that was all he needed, because confirmation in his world did not come through words, it came through moments like that, moments where control slipped just enough to reveal intent. He adjusted his jacket with a smooth motion, his gaze sweeping the room in a way that seemed idle but was anything but, mapping positions, distances, possibilities. The man at the bar shifted again, this time more noticeably, his attention no longer drifting but fixed, as if waiting for a signal that had not yet arrived, and near the glass panels, the reflection revealed something else, a subtle alignment of figures outside, not obvious, not threatening to the untrained eye, but positioned just slightly too still, too deliberate, and Damien understood then that the glass was not an exit, it was a variable, one that had not been fully controlled, one that Ava had pointed him toward because it broke the pattern rather than completing it, and across the room, Ava felt the tension rise like pressure before a storm, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of her tray as she watched the shift ripple outward. The man at the bar adjusted his stance again, the blocked exit remained in place, but the focus had moved, redirected toward Damien's unexpected path, and that was the danger of disrupting a plan. It forced everything else to move faster, to adapt in real time, and Ava knew there would be no more quiet corrections after this, no more subtle warnings, the next moments would decide everything. Damien stepped toward the glass, his pace steady, unhurried, each movement deliberate, refusing to give anyone the reaction they might be waiting for, and as he reached the edge of the dining area, he paused just slightly, not enough to seem uncertain, but enough to observe, to listen, to feel the room settle into a new configuration around him. Vanessa remained seated for a fraction longer than expected before rising as well, her movements graceful, controlled, but now carrying a different energy, not guiding, but following, adjusting to a path she had not chosen, and that shift changed her role entirely, from orchestrator to participant, and Damien understood the significance of that, because control was no longer entirely hers, not anymore. And as he reached for the handle near the glass panels, his reflection met his own eyes for a brief second, calm, focused. Unshaken, but behind that calm was a single, undeniable truth: someone had built this night around him, planned it with precision, expected his every move, and yet, because of one quiet voice, one unseen presence that refused to stay invisible, that plan was no longer certain, and in a world where certainty was everything, that was the most dangerous change of all. The moment a plan breaks is never loud, it is a silence that no longer feels right. The glass door did not make a sound when Damien Romano pushed it open, just a soft shift in air, a subtle change that most people inside did not even register, but outside, everything felt different, the city noise distant, muted, as if the world beyond the restaurant had been waiting for him to step into it, and for a brief second, nothing happened, no sudden movement, no obvious threat, just the faint reflection of lights across the glass panels and the cool night air brushing against his face, and that was exactly what made Damien pause, not visibly, not enough for anyone watching to question it, but internally, because the absence of reaction was the final confirmation. The plan had been built on timing, on expectation, and now that he had stepped outside of it, the response had nowhere to land. Behind him, through the glass, Vanessa stopped just short of the doorway, her posture still composed, but her eyes sharper now, calculating, watching not as a partner, but as someone reassessing variables in real time. And inside the dining room, the man at the bar no longer pretended to be casual, his focus locked, his stance shifting again, waiting for something that had not unfolded the way it was supposed to. And across the room, Ava felt it too, the strange stillness, the way everything seemed to hesitate at once, like a held breath that had nowhere to release, and she understood what it meant. The plan had lost its rhythm, the sequence broken just enough that those behind it had to adjust, and adjustment meant exposure, small, fleeting, but real, because perfection did not need correction, only flawed designs did. Damien took another step forward, away from the immediate edge of the glass, his movement deliberate, controlled, refusing to linger where he could be anticipated, and as he did, he let his eyes drift along the reflections, not searching for danger, but for intention, for the slight misalignments that revealed where attention was being placed. And there it was, not a threat, not anything overt, but a subtle shift in the positioning of figures beyond the glass, a delay, a hesitation, as if the moment they had prepared for had passed them by without warning. And in that delay, Damien recognized something he had not felt in a long time: advantage, not because the danger was gone, but because it no longer moved with certainty, and certainty was what made plans dangerous, uncertainty was what made them fragile. Inside, Vanessa's smile returned, but it no longer carried the same ease, it was tighter, more controlled, as she stepped closer to the door, choosing to follow rather than lead. And that single change redefined her completely, no longer the architect of the evening, but someone forced to adapt within it. And Ava watched that transformation from across the room, her heartbeat steady, her breathing controlled, but her focus absolute, because she knew this was not the end of anything, only the shift into something new, something less predictable, and therefore more dangerous in a different way. Damien's hand rested briefly against the cool surface near the glass, grounding himself in the moment, in the awareness that someone had tried to write his next move for him, had assumed they understood him well enough to predict his choices, and yet, because of one quiet interruption, one unexpected voice that refused to stay silent, that certainty had collapsed. And as he turned slightly, positioning himself where he could see both inside and out without being fully exposed to either, the room behind him and the night ahead both paused in that fragile balance, no longer aligned, no longer certain. And in that thin space between intention and outcome, the night revealed its truth. It was no longer about what had been planned, it was about who could adapt faster. And for the first time since he walked into that restaurant, Damien Romano was no longer the one being guided, he was the one rewriting the direction of everything around him. Truth does not announce itself, it reveals itself in what people cannot hide when things stop going their way. The moment stretched longer than it should have, that fragile silence between expectation and reality lingering just enough to expose what had been carefully concealed all night. And Damien Romano did not move immediately, he did not rush forward or retreat, instead he stayed exactly where he was, positioned between the reflection of the dining room behind him and the dim glow of the city ahead, allowing the imbalance to settle, to deepen, because in that imbalance, people revealed themselves. And through the glass, he watched Vanessa more closely than he ever had before, not as a man observing the woman he planned to marry, but as someone studying a pattern that had just broken, and what he saw was no longer flawless. Her posture remained elegant, her movements controlled, but the timing was off now, her gaze lingering a second too long on certain points in the room, her attention splitting between him and something else she could not fully reach anymore, and that was when Damien understood the most important detail of all. She had not expected to lose control, not even for a moment, and that meant everything unfolding now was no longer part of her design. Inside, the staff continued moving, the music still played, but beneath it, there was a current of awareness spreading quietly, people sensing something had shifted without knowing why, and at the edge of it all, Ava stood still for just a fraction longer than she should have, her tray held against her side, her eyes fixed not on Damien, but on the reflections that told her more than direct sight ever could, because now she could see it clearly. The connections that had been invisible before were beginning to surface, the man at the bar no longer pretending, his attention too focused, another figure near the hallway adjusting position as if waiting for a cue that never came, and Vanessa, no longer leading them, but reacting, recalculating. And that change was everything, because it meant the plan was no longer ahead of Damien. It was behind him, trying to catch up. Damien shifted his weight slightly, turning just enough to face the glass at an angle that allowed him to see both worlds at once, and for the first time, he did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He trusted something outside his own design, not blindly, not completely, but enough to follow the path that had been opened to him, and that path led back inside, not toward the hallway, not toward the obvious exits, but toward the one variable no one had accounted for, the waitress who had refused to stay invisible. And as he stepped back through the door, the subtle shift in the room became undeniable. Conversations faltered for half a second, eyes flickered in his direction, and Vanessa turned toward him with that same composed expression, but now there was a question behind it, a question she could not ask without revealing too much, and Damien met her gaze calmly, his presence steady, controlled, but different now, no longer moving within her expectations, but outside of them. And somewhere across the room, Ava felt that shift reach her like a quiet signal, the moment where observation turned into consequence, because now he knew enough, not everything, but enough to change the outcome, and that was all it took, one person seeing clearly, one person acting at the right moment, and suddenly a plan that had taken weeks, maybe months to build, no longer belonged to the people who created it, it belonged to the one who refused to follow it, and in that moment, the truth settled into the room without a single word being spoken. The power had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Power does not always shift with force, sometimes it changes hands in a moment of understanding. The room did not erupt, it did not collapse into chaos, instead it settled into something far more unsettling, a quiet, measured stillness where every movement carried weight, where every glance meant more than words ever could, and Damien Romano stood at the center of it without raising his voice, without making a scene, simply present in a way that made everything else adjust around him. His eyes moved once across the room and that was enough. The man at the bar turned away first, too quickly. Too deliberately, the figure near the hallway stepped back into the shadows, no longer waiting for a signal that would never come, and Vanessa remained where she was, poised, composed, but no longer in control, her smile still there, but thinner now, held in place rather than freely given, and Damien took a slow step toward the table, his gaze steady on her, not accusing, not confrontational, but knowing. And that difference stripped away everything she had built the night upon, because plans relied on ignorance, and once understanding entered the room, even silently, they lost their foundation. We should leave, he said, his voice calm, almost gentle, as if suggesting something ordinary, but there was no question in it, no room for refusal, and for a brief moment, Vanessa held his gaze, searching for something she could still use, some thread of control she could pull back into her hands, but it was gone, not taken from her, simply no longer available, and she nodded once, the smallest movement, acceptance disguised as agreement, because there was nothing else left to do, and across the room, Ava felt the shift complete itself, not through noise or spectacle, but through silence, through the way tension released without resolution, through the way people returned to their conversations a little too quickly, pretending nothing had happened while knowing something had changed, and she lowered her gaze again, returning to her work, her movements as quiet and unremarkable as they had been at the start of the night, because that was where she belonged. Not in the center, not in the story people would tell later, but in the space where things changed without being seen. Damien paused near the edge of the table before leaving, just for a second, just long enough for his eyes to find her reflection in the glass, not directly, never directly, but enough for recognition to pass between them, not gratitude spoken aloud, not acknowledgement that could be overheard, but something quieter, something heavier. The understanding that in a room full of power, the only person who had truly seen what was happening had been the one no one was looking at, and Ava did not look up. She did not break the role she had held all night, but her hands stilled for a fraction of a second, her breath steady, her eyes fixed on the surface in front of her, because she felt it too, that silent exchange, that unspoken shift, and then it was gone. Damien turned, Vanessa followed, and they walked out of the restaurant as if the night had gone exactly as planned, but the truth lingered behind them, woven into the quiet, into the reflections, into the spaces between movements where reality had revealed itself, and as the door closed softly, leaving the room exactly as it had been, Ava Brooks remained where she was, unseen. Unrecognized by everyone except one man who would never forget the moment a voice from the background changed the direction of everything, and that night, without applause, without acknowledgement, dignity did not need to announce itself, it simply stood its ground and refused to be ignored.